Bodyholic with D. This is episode number 17. My name is D. Katz Shachar, and I am a public health promoter. I've attained my MPH from Tel Aviv University on the research track, and I am a fitness trainer with over 17 years of experience. And I hold specializations in corrective exercise, women's fitness, and Pilates. I'm also the founder and trainer of Bodyholic, the global health and fitness platform and community. I'm the author of Rip It Up for Good, and this podcast is a part of my effort and mission as a public health professional because I believe that real science-based information and knowledge is power. And my job in this life is to empower you. I want you to have high and sustained energy throughout the day, and I want you to feel better than you have ever felt before, during, and after your workouts, in and out of your clothing, and not only physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. A word about the upcoming episode that you are going to hear. It was an incredibly insightful and fun for me. It was a conversation about creatine for the most part. We deviated a little bit, and I love those deviations, and I hope you will as well. I believe you will. And the guest is Daniel Herman, who is the founder of a company called Biosynergy, which launched in 1997. He is a qualified nutritionist, an SAQ coach, and he's super passionate about all things that have to do with health and fitness. And you're gonna see it in the interview. Just a little bit about Biosynergy. I want to give credit where credit is due. It is an award-winning company where you can also do the DNA testing and find out what exercises, what nutrition, what supplements are actually best for you, where your sweet spot is. And so what I've done is gone ahead and linked everything to this episode. And once you've listened to our conversation, once you've heard Daniel speak, I'm sure that you will feel that you will definitely benefit from looking through Biosynergy and reading up on it and maybe even reaching out. So without further ado, here is the episode. Daniel Herman.
Yes.
How are you? Thank you so much for being here with us.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure. Always good to chat about the stuff that I'm passionate about and love to talk about. So yeah, great to be on the podcast with you and hopefully explore the benefits of creatine. And obviously I've been in that game for 26 years now. So I'd like to think I'm passionate about it, but every day is a school day. So maybe you'll be dropping some knowledge bombs on me as well.
We'll see about that. I do feel like I'm talking to the person I should be talking to regarding creatine. And I think you and I think I mentioned to you, I was going to go off on a monologue about creatine. And then I was like, wow, I'm not the person. It's you I should be talking to. So I'm really happy about that. Let's maybe start by just defining it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd like to just say I'm not an expert in terms of a PhD or a scientist. I rely on data and research by people like Paul Greenhalgh, Ron Morn, and there's lots of other amazing scientists out there who are at the cutting edge of science and specifically around creatine. I'm a kind of doctor of that science. So I am a nutritionist by qualification. I'm also an SAQ coach. And I've been developing, we launched our first creatine product back in 1997. And all of that was really around the research that, like I said, Ron Moore and Paul Greenhalgh published at the time. So there's a lot of misconceptions around creatine. First of all, that it's going to make you muscly. Second of all, that it's not suitable for vegans or vegetarians. Thirdly, that it's only suitable if you're doing heavy weights. So just to kind of bring it back a little bit. So everybody's got creatine in their body. We've got between 80 and 120 grams stored in our muscles. And what it's responsible for is recycling what's called anaerobic energy, or people will talk about the ATP cycle or the Krebs cycle. So what that means is if you're doing, let's say, strength training, what you're doing typically is anaerobic, and this is where you're tapping into that energy source, this ATP source. And creatine's role there is to recycle that energy more efficiently. So what that typically means is that you can do either less rest or have less rest in between reps, or you can increase maybe your 1 rep max or do more repetitions. And then people assume, therefore, that's what's making your muscles grow. It's not the creatine, it's the activity that you're doing that the creatine is allowing you to do. So over my career, I've been really fortunate. I've worked with kind of sprint athletes. I've worked with just gym goers. I've worked with F1 drivers. And what's interesting, and again, something that often gets overlooked with creatine, is that even if you're an endurance athlete, there will be an anaerobic element to your performance. So if we think about, say, running, let's say you've done a marathon, which by anybody's standards is an endurance event, but it might be that you're at the front of the pack, or you've got a PB you want to beat and you sprint the last 100 meters. Mm-hmm. That is anaerobic energy, and this is where this creatine is going to be beneficial. So what we found anecdotally is some people have higher creatine stores than others, and therefore will respond differently to creatine as a supplement. So the most common source of creatine is creatine monohydrate. And the great thing is about that is that it used to be made or taken from, meat-based products where you'd normally find creatine in your diet. So, for example, steak. Now, actually, pretty much all of that is available as a vegan or vegetarian source. And that's the creatine monohydrate. And that's derived from fermented corn or beets, believe it or not. So actually...
From beets?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the great thing is that people perhaps who've always thought of creatine because its relationship to meat traditionally thought they couldn't benefit from them. Actually, they can, which is great, particularly if you are a strength athlete. The other thing that's interesting is that as research has kind of progressed, they're now showing that there's other benefits beyond performance with creatine. So there's a lot of research that's being undertaken about cognitive function, about helping older people who may be at risk of sarcopenia. And also, obviously, that widens the appeal to it. So you'll see, like, for example, nootropics are beginning to use creatine in their formulas. You'll be seeing older segments of the community using creatine as well, because obviously as you get older, you're at higher risk of muscle wastage. And if you can slow that down and mitigate that, then that's beneficial for your longevity and your well-being. And which is why often, if you're in over 50s, it's actually really good to do strength training, because that helps with your longevity and your health and your well-being. So I'm now in that group. So I'm going to be doing even more strength training than
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Actually, I haven't made it technically. I've got another 3 months, but all things being equal,
I have to tell you, I disagree with saying your upcoming age ahead of time.
Okay.
Like I'm 37. I was 36 until the day I turned 37. Yeah. I'm just putting that out there.
I think, you're young. Whatever works. Works.
So you're talking about strength training when you're over 50. I mean, in general, strength training is, king as far as I'm concerned. But you're referring to creatine in that age group as again to help with recovery.
Yeah, to help recovery, to help with improving your ability to exercise more efficiently. So anecdotally, I'd say that your creatine stores probably reduce over time, a bit like other things that do as you get older. Mm-hmm. Bone density starts to reduce, particularly if you're female and you're postmenopausal. So there's that. The other thing that we do is we do DNA and epigenetic testing within our business. And actually one of the markers that we look at is how well you're going to benefit from using creatine, and do you need it in your diet? So there's two aspects to that. One is it could be from an ethnic point of view or from a genetic point of view, that actually you benefit more from creatine just for health and well-being. So like I said, you've got between 80 and 120 grams stored in your body anyway. And then there's the other point of view, which is it becomes relevant to the type of training and exercise that you're doing and what your goals are. So again, even though historically it's been associated with, weightlifting and strength training, and most activities, like say football or soccer, as you might call it in Israel or America, there's be a multi-sprint, although it's an endurance event because you're playing, 2 halves, 45 minutes each. Within that game, there's going to be explosive movements where you're going to tap into that anaerobic store of energy where creatine becomes beneficial. So again, a lot of
that's kind of like the sprint at the end of the marathon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's also a lot of evidence. So again, I'll go back to Paul Greenhalgh. His data suggested that the best way to use creatine was to do what's called a 5-day loading dose to increase the amount of creatine that you're storing in your body to its optimum, and then maintaining that dose for 2 months post-loading, and then to cycle off of it. So again, a bit like with your training, any supplements, there are some exceptions, for example, protein and vitamins and so on, but I'd say performance-related products, it's probably good to cycle them on and off. So that way you keep getting the optimum benefit from them. So a bit like with your training, you're a trainer, you'll know that if you just did the same program all the time, you start getting diminishing returns from that program, and you have to mix it up or swap it up or have a week off or whatever.
It's kind of like we're down regulating kind of the way we adjust to whatever we consume, even sugar. And then if we do, or caffeine even, and then if we don't use it for a while, then we get that hit again or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you be a little bit more specific? Because I think this is really important. Specific about the 5-day loading with the creatine in combination with the training, or give an example for maybe it's weight training or marathon, or et cetera.
So I say, going back to Greenhalgh's work, so what he's shown is that, you said you've got this 80 to 120 gram store of creatine in your body. What you want to do is increase the pool of creatine available to you. So by taking 20 grams a day over a 5-day period, whilst doing what he calls suboptimal training, so still training, but not really going for it training, you're allowing this store to build up in your muscles to its optimum amount. So you're kind of creating, optimum creatine absorption, I guess. That then allows that kind of pool to be available when you then go back to train. The other thing that he talks about actually is during that loading phase to try and avoid caffeine, because that can actually help. That actually can prevent the absorption of the creatine more efficiently. So although some pre-workouts will have creatine and a caffeine in there, generally they're being used on a tactical basis and maybe post a creatine loading. So when you're doing this loading phase, ideally suboptimal exercise, so not doing 1 rep max or 80%, maybe doing relatively high reps, probably 50 to 60% of your maximum weights, avoiding caffeine, drinking plenty of water. So again, a lot of times people have anecdotally spoken about bloating or things like that with creatine.
Right.
Generally, that's because they've not been taking in enough water, and or maybe they're not using a particularly good quality product. So what we did, our first innovation was
in terms of biosynergy.
Yeah. So our first innovation was we actually created a 2-phase pack. So your phase 1 was your 5-day loading, and we did it in a chemical formulation to ensure that you were doing it in an accurate and measured dosage. So again, Greenhalgh talks about hitting 20 grams a day. So sometimes even with your scoop, you could be a little bit over or a little bit under. By putting it into a capsule and having a measured dose, you know exactly how much you're taking each day. And then we had a phase 2, which was basically your maintenance from day 6 onwards. So day 6 onwards, you need a much smaller amount of creatine, and that basically just keeps you at that optimal level for the next 2 months. And again, we would then recommend, again, in line with the research, you stop for a month, have a break, and then maybe hit it again following that break.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry if I missed it. First of all, this is really, really fascinating. And you still, Biosynergy still has the pills and this whole format.
Yeah.
Just so that I'm really clear, because I think I missed it. When you're going hard training,
Yeah.
it's during the 5 days, or is it afterwards?
So post the 5 days. So during the first 5 days of loading, you want to do lower intensity training.
Got
So
it.
what you want to do is give your muscles the chance to absorb the creatine. So you've got that pool of creatine to then allow you to optimize your training going ahead.
Mm-hmm.
You were constantly like training very hard. You're going to be using those creatine stores in your training. So you're not going to give yourself a chance to build it up post the loading period. But then obviously what's happened in intervening years, people have launched like pre-workouts with creatine in. They've launched, we do ourselves. There's also some good evidence about combining creatine with carbohydrates to help with the absorption of the creatine more efficiently. So you'll see blends, including our own, which will have a combination of creatine and carbohydrates, and in our case, glutamine as well, which they're not going to be, in my opinion, as effective as doing the loading, but they offer somebody who's not a regular trainer or doesn't particularly want to do the loading an alternative, which is going to give them some of the benefit of taking creatine regularly.
Okay, so that's like the more modified version.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was very enlightening, and yeah, thank you for clarifying. So we were talking about the fact that people associate creatine with strength training, with power sports, and like you said, the ATP, the anaerobic aspect. And you also touched on the cognitive function, and you said sarcopenia and rehabilitation. So maybe you can just talk about that a little bit more. I'm really interested in how creatine works in terms of cognitive function.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole new area that's kind of study at the moment, and it's about brain aging. I don't know a lot about it, to be frank. I wouldn't want to kind of pretend that I do. It is something that we're working on a number of nootropic products at the moment, and as a result of that research, we saw that there's more and more research coming out from very well respected peer-reviewed studies about creatine and cognitive function, and also helping people rehabilitate with some neurological conditions as well. I'm not sure what the science is behind how that works, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it's an area that we're going to be paying a lot of attention to. And I think that, anybody listening, probably, head over to PubMed or, a good quality website that has good quality research on it, and find out more for yourself. The thing that we actually did way back in the late 90s, and again, it was an unpublished study, but we looked at how creatine supplementation could reduce muscle wastage as a result of a break. So we worked with the Royal Free Hospital, a technician there. It's a well-known London hospital. And we just looked at people who were in a cast in their leg, and some of them we gave creatine to and some of them we didn't, to see if the muscle wastage as a result of the cast was reduced through creatine supplementation. Anecdotally, we found that actually by supplementing with creatine whilst in a cast, reduced that muscle wastage that you would normally happen from not using that muscle, whether it be a leg or an arm, during that period of rehabilitation. And also post rehab, so when the cast was off, getting the muscle mass back to where it was pre-break. So that's really an interesting area, and I'm not sure if somebody a bit more scientific has picked it up and done proper random crossover studies on that. But I do think that's a very interesting area to explore.
That's fascinating. I'm actually gonna check that out. I'm also going to check out the cognitive function. Yeah, I'm going to get on it.
And I think the other thing is just, and again, this has definitely happened, is that, again, back in the 90s, really up until probably the last 5 years, I think that creatine was very much associated with weightlifting and bodybuilding, and was very kind of male kind of dominated in terms of the way marketed and everything else. I think what's happened is people have actually realized that the ability to improve your recovery within an endurance event, and also to prepare for an endurance event, creatine can play a really significant role. So again, even if we've worked with some fantastic athletes over the last 25, 26 years, one of them was a guy called James Cracknell, who's a 2 times Olympic gold medalist in rowing, who then transitioned into doing cycling and long distance runs. And what he said is, one of the bits of advice he was given by another athlete is that actually, in order to train for an endurance event, you also do lots of small, shorter runs to build up your power and your capacity, both aerobic and anaerobic. Right. And so therefore any endurance activity is often made up of multiple mini sprint activities within it, whether it's crossing the line or maybe you're on a gradient. So I was reading about an event that's happening in the UK, which is only a 1 mile run, but it's a 30% gradient. If you're running that, you're going to be using a lot of anaerobic energy.
For sure.
And therefore, this is where the creatine, you're going to be working your muscles really hard. If you can get your muscles recovering better as you're doing, that's going to help you perform better and recover faster. So again, I think the key thing is for people listening is, just because weight training isn't your go-to goal or exercise, don't dismiss creatine as having a benefit for you as part of your training regime and also as part of your well-being. So again, back to the DNA testing that we've done, for some people, from a genetic point of view, they need creatine in their diet just for well-being.
This is something that I just want to pause for a moment and also say this is something that you do, Daniel, in biosynergy. Is it part of the company?
Yeah.
The DNA testing, which I've heard about this, and this is one of the reasons I actually reached out to you, because I thought it was so fascinating regarding the DNA testing, and maybe we'll talk about this on another episode in the near future. But so you have the kit, you test the DNA, and you can tell me if me on a personal level will respond to creatine supplementation or not. Is it possible that I won't respond? And you can tell me that according to my DNA.
So that basically you'll have a predisposition to the benefit of creatine for you, but that can be contextualized. So say, for example, you come up, we've done your DNA, and for you specifically, creatine is of no or little benefit. That will be for your well-being. However, if, for example, you were exercising quite a lot, or you're particularly looking at taking part in a competitive event, or you're a vegetarian or vegan, or possibly vegan and doing a lot of weightlifting, the likelihood is, as a result of your lifestyle, contextually, creatine would now become beneficial. So there's looking at what is your genetic predisposition versus your lifestyle and what you're actually doing day to day in terms of exercise, if at all. So obviously not everybody exercises. So if you weren't exercising and your DNA said of no benefit, you wouldn't need it for well-being. If, however, creatine was of benefit and you were exercising, you'd probably want to definitely take it. So there's lots of different kind of options there available to you, but at least you would know the likelihood of it benefiting you.
And if I had the predisposition to creatine, you would know that I would benefit from it. And I'm not a person who works out, let's say.
Yeah.
Would I take it as like one of my morning supplements?
Absolutely. So you probably wouldn't do the loading dose because that wouldn't be relevant for you. You would just take it as a daily supplement along with your omegas or vitamin D or selenium or anything else. But again, this is going to be contextual to your diet. So if, for example, you were a big meat eater and you were eating like steak for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the likelihood is you might not necessarily need additional creatine from a supplement. If, however, red meat didn't feature heavily in your diet, you would definitely want to consider that.
And for my pregnant listeners, and I also train many pregnant women, and there are also pregnant women who train on Bodyholic. Do we want to steer clear from creatine? Or, I mean, of course, you talk to your doctor before you take anything. That is, first of all. So you talk to your doctor says, I trust this company. Is creatine something a pregnant woman would want to take, especially if she trains hard?
I think I don't think there's been any specific research about the safety or efficacy of creatine use during pregnancy. What I would say is that if you've used creatine pre-pregnancy and you found it to be beneficial, then it may well be beneficial for you if you're continuing to train during pregnancy. So again, a lot of women are different. There's some women, during pregnancy will go, it doesn't dissuade them from going to the gym at all. In fact, some of them I know personally have trained even harder.
Oh, for sure. That's why I'm mentioning it, because I faced women who in their pregnancy load up the bar. Yeah.
So I think, you just got to take it on on an individual basis. I think, if you've got concerns, a GP might be able to give you some advice. The likelihood is a lot of doctors may not be, they're not qualified, but they might not have experience around supplementation, particularly creatine, and the benefits or not during pregnancy. So I think you've got to listen to your own body, and maybe having a pre-existing usage of the product would be helpful. So I'm not aware of any contraindications around creatine and embryos or fetal development or anything like that, but I'm not a doctor. And I wouldn't be advising anybody to take creatine during that period. Again, anecdotally, I do know women who've used it and found it to be extremely beneficial, and not affected the development of the child. So it's a difficult subject to answer. I mean, what I would say is that if you want to take creatine during pregnancy, but you don't like the idea of supplementation, maybe eat some more steak, and that way you're going to get it naturally. So it might be a good reason to go out and buy more steaks, or
there you go,
or some more of a red meat, because generally that is where you would find it. So typically in a normal steak, you would find 2 to 3 grams in a steak. And I guess that's where supplementation becomes interesting, because if you were to eat enough steak to have a performance benefit on you from the creatine, you would probably have a lot of downside from eating that much steak. So you probably have 10 steaks a day.
Oh my God. Okay.
Performance. So I don't know what the calorie intake on that would be, or the saturated fats, but it'd probably be detrimental to you, at least for most people. So I think, this is the whole thing about supplementation. It's about the reason why supplements are called supplements. They're not an alternative to a healthy diet. They're not an alternative to exercise. They're there to help fill a gap that might exist in your diet, or to make something more convenient for you. So again, if you wanted to, increase your creatine store, yes, you could eat lots of steak, but leaving aside the potential health benefits, the cost of eating 10 steaks a day, you're probably better off with a creatine supplement than you are buying 10 steaks.
Yeah. When you say 10 steaks a day, I already feel it like rising. I'm like, I'll take the supplement.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to deviate for a moment because you touched on something, the gap that the supplements are there to fill. It seems to me that the supplementation of creatine is extremely beneficial, right? And that, of course, I'm just going to say that again. Of course, it's after you've made sure that the supplement is right for you, and you can also turn to biosynergy, and you can take the DNA test. Can anybody take the DNA testing in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So we would certainly recommend, for me, it's about having a roadmap to being your best self. So for a lot of people, we follow diets that we've seen in a magazine or a friend's done or somebody on Instagram or blah, blah, blah. And assuming that those are accurate and have worked for the individuals that purport that they have, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. And that can have two impacts. One, you could spend yourself time going down a rabbit hole of something that was just never going to work for you. And that gets frustrating. And it may be that you fall out of love with your fitness journey and it actually sets you back.
Right.
Alternatively, you might be lucky and it might work, but you don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
What the purpose of our DNA product is to give you an individualized roadmap of what exercise is going to work best for you, what your diet consist of, what supplements, if any, you may need, how much are you at risk of certain things. Let's say, for example, in my case, I'm at high risk of lower back pain, Achilles tendinopathy, genetic obesity, and type 2 diabetes. Now, for you as a trainer, let's say you've got a lot of people that you're training online. You might ask them for a BMI test. You might ask them for their height, their weight, to do a food diary. And all of that is really useful information. But if, for example, you don't know that they're high risk of lower back injury, and as part of your program, you recommend doing deadlifts and squats, which is a great exercise, but then injure themselves because they've got this predisposition to a high risk. Not only they potentially incurred an injury, which then means they're not now following their program.
Right.
Actually, at the front end, you could have recommended a different protocol. So maybe a leg press or something else, which would have given a similar or the same result, but reduced the risk of that injury happening and then therefore not being able to participate in the next session or maybe the next 20 sessions.
Right.
Equally, you've got things like the keto diet and so on and so forth. And for some people that will work, as will intermittent fasting, but it's not going to work for everybody. So we actually did a test with identical female twins and actually found out that although the genes that determine their height, hair color, eye color, gender, etc., obviously matched, they both needed to exercise and eat slightly different things, which was determining that even though both of them were following the same program, one of them was benefiting more from it than another. So once you know what works for you, it's going to always work, and you only have to do it. So you never have to do a DNA test twice.
I feel like sending everybody to Biosynergy to do the DNA test.
Honestly, it's the single best thing you can do, because the most precious thing we all have in our lives is time. So if you're going to only dedicate an hour a day or even less to your exercise, you want to
nail it. Yeah.
You want to maximize that. And what you don't want to do is waste it doing the wrong thing for you. So it's
100%.
And also the same comes to food. If you could think, oh, I need more protein in my diet, and you rush out and you're buying lots of high protein foods and everything on your plate is high protein. And actually, depending on your genetics, actually you might need more carbs. So there are general rules, 20% of your calories should come from protein, 70% from carbohydrates, 10% from fats, which is a general rule, is accurate. But when you start talking about specifics and us as individuals, you could probably tear that rule book up.
I'm going to have a link below this episode, and I'm going to send it out in the email for this episode also. So yeah, we'll make sure to get that up. And I actually didn't ask the question that popped into my mind before, and I'm going to get back to it now. So my tendency is to say creatine is a really important supplement if I want, especially if I train hard and I want to recover fast. And for me personally, training hard is part of my sanity regime.
Yep.
So it's something that I really can't put aside. And so I do want to recover. Recovering is really important. So there's that. But then the question to me is, I guess you could also determine this in the DNA testing as well, but I feel that I benefit greatly from eating protein. I actually don't supplement with protein. And I was wondering what your take is on that. And would that also, it sounds like that might be also in the DNA testing, or
it is, absolutely. I mean, I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, the general rule of thumb, if you're exercising regularly, is to take between 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, or percent of your calories. So it could well be, if you've got a really great diet, that you're hitting that requirement. So let's say, I'm guessing you're somewhere around 50, 55 kilos. So that's about 110 grams of protein per day. So that could be like 4 eggs and a chicken breast and a bit of fish throughout the day. So you're hitting that. It's fine. It's perfect. Maybe you're vegan, maybe you're getting it from tofu, but then there's questions about bioavailability and so on. So generally, animal sources of protein have got a more bioavailability, and also have got a better amino acid profile. So even
the absorption.
Yeah. So even when you've got, vegan athletes, let's say Lewis Hamilton, I think is famously now a vegan athlete. But if you look at all his career up until about 2 years ago, he was an omnivore. So there's a lot of questions about, and the same as Schwarzenegger was in that, documentary as well, that he's now gone flexitarian or vegan. But the question is, could they have got to where they got to in their chosen sport on a vegan diet from birth? And nobody's conducted that bit of research yet. So protein supplementation, a bit like creatine, about like any other supplementation, is about filling a gap in your diet. So if you're really good at food prep, you know how much protein you should be having per day, and you've measured it out and you've nailed it, great, that's fantastic. For a lot of people, particularly if you're on the go, or you don't like preparing food, or you hate cooking, hands up on one of those, a protein powder is a very, very convenient, low-cost way of hitting your protein requirements. And particularly if you're exercising, you'll know this, if you're not getting in enough protein, you actually start having muscle wastage, because what is, your body is craving that protein for muscle recovery. It can't find it, so it breaks down stored muscle to feed itself. So you get this like weird situation. You could be training harder, potentially getting stronger, but your muscle mass is reducing because you're not getting enough protein in your diet. And I think, again, this is something that we've seen over the last 20 odd years. Historically, women thought, if you had protein, it gave you muscles, or it gave you made you hair. And there's lots of like strange things around protein that put women off, and that was largely because the industry tended to put big bodybuilding guys on the front of the product packaging, and that's not actually the case. It's a bit like with creatine. Protein is an essential part of your diet, and without it, you just can't be your healthiest, best version.
100%.
Again, if we look at particularly postmenopausal women, the risk of osteoporosis, reduction in bone density, weight training is an absolute must. And then side by side with that, protein supplementation, if you're not getting it from your diet, can be absolutely vital.
Absolutely. And that also brings me back to pregnancy. I just have to hop back on that because protein during pregnancy is extremely vital. And so, there's nothing more feminine or female than pregnancy. And there you go. That's when you need protein, probably are most or second most in your life.
Yeah. Funnily enough, we actually developed in 2012 an active woman range. And within that, we have a protein powder. And we actually specifically looking at the fact that women were training during pregnancy. So we fortified it with calcium, vitamin D, and folic acid. Because calcium and vitamin D obviously are good for bone density, which again can reduce as a result of pregnancy. And folic acid, I think everybody knows the potential benefits for fetal brain development. So we added that in as well, but we still made it an 84% low carb, low fat product.
And you're still selling that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. Very good to know. You and I are going to talk a little later.
Yeah.
So I just want to go back to the beets.
Yeah.
Is that the plant-based source for creatine, or are there other sources?
There's mostly corn or beets.
Oh, corn or okay.
It's through the fermentation process that the creatine monohydrate is created. I don't understand the science behind that, because I knew, and we've used certainly for the last 20 years, if not longer, a vegan friendly source of creatine. It was only when I started doing some research, thanks to you, that I actually realized where it came from. So not only is this a learning for you and your listeners, it was actually a learning for me. I knew it was there. I had no idea that it was from the fermentation of corn or beetroots. So yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, really fascinating. And should I dive into this on my own, or can you tell me a little bit about the effectiveness of the alternatives?
So the research suggests that actually the fermented version from a vegan source is actually better than the original animal-based source. The reason being, and again, I'm sure there'll be research that will go against this, but I say that the research that I've looked at as a result of you giving me the opportunity to speak today, because it's being created from this fermentation process, they're able to make sure of the purity of the level of the creatine. Whereas obviously in an animal, if you cut me up and ate me, which would be a bit weird, but my creatine might not be as good as your creatine. And that's going to vary from, normally it was from a bovine source. So you might have animals that were perhaps bred, grass-fed, really healthy animals, and have amazing quality creatine, whereas you might have had the equivalent of, battery farmed dairy where this creatine was being sourced from. So by going to the fermentation, more scientific method, I guess, you're able to get that quality across the board.
That is so cool. And that makes me so happy, because I actually am vegan, but I recently felt like I actually needed to cancel out the veganism once a month or so. But knowing that there is this option is actually, and it's better, makes me really happy.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I think as a vegan athlete or exercise, somebody that's doing creatine will definitely be very important. You're not going to be getting it in your diet. Right. I certainly think, from a protein point of view, again, from a lot of the vegan vegetarian sources, you might need to consider supplementation, because you're not drinking milk either. So, right. And the fact that, again, that you're doing strength exercise, that you're a woman, all of these things kind of feed into what you might want to consider to help you achieve your goals.
Absolutely. The last thing I want to address is the side effect or potential harm that is pretty widely discussed regarding creatine, or at least if you look into it a little bit, dig into it a little bit, then it certainly pops up. And the concerns are usually about gastrointestinal issues, and water retention. The water retention, like you said, the main thing is actually to hydrate.
Correct.
But what can you tell me a little bit about the gastrointestinal issues that people discussed?
Again, I think it's water based. So again, that's why the capsules were good, because it encouraged you to drink water. So I've seen examples on TikTok of people just getting, dry scooping, creatine or pre-workout, and that's definitely not the way to go. It's a bit like, with every meal you should drink water, or at least some kind of fluid, because it's going to help with digestion, the mastication, and everything else.
Right.
So the same applies to any kind of supplementation. If you're trying to dry a protein powder, that's probably going to lead to some gastro issues as well, because it needs to be in a liquid. It needs to get into your system in an efficient way. So obviously, if you're taking a supplement and you're eating, you need between 1.5 to 2 liters of water a day anyway. I'd say 90% of us probably don't achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
And that can lead to a gastro issue anyway. So if you're then compounding that by adding in other things that you're taking without sufficient fluid, you're just maybe pushing yourself over the edge a little bit in terms of irritation. So I think that
also goes with, that's true for taking antibiotics. That's true for taking any hormonal supplements. I think the main thing is, and this is something that I talk about a lot, is hydration. And I go on and on and on about it, because it's something that people actually don't pay enough attention to.
Yeah.
So it's like, keep filling up the bottle. Don't just let it sit there and say it's full. So you got to drink it and then, then fill it up. Absolutely.
The other thing is again, what the capsules did is it allowed people to spread the dosage throughout the day. So rather than having 20 grams in a single serve or single sitting, by having it divided throughout the day, not only is that encouraging you to drink more water, but it's preventing that kind of overload kind of situation that you might experience by having it in one serving.
Mm-hmm. This was such an interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
I would just say that, when it comes to any kind of supplementation or diet or exercise or anything about you and your body, that don't rely on anecdotal evidence. Try and get to the source. Try and look at where that source is coming from. Try and look for experts. And when I say experts, I don't mean somebody who says, it's usually the people that don't say they're experts that generally are, and go beyond social media for that information. There is some really good resources out there. Again, as much as I'd say, look at our website, don't take our word for anything. Go and do your own proprietary research, go to the source, go to where, the science has been published, and look for science that hasn't been sponsored by parties that have got an interest in the outcome of that science. To try and look at independent research and try and look for people that have been doing it for a while. Now, I've mentioned Paul Greenhalgh and Ron Morn. Paul Greenhalgh was probably, we're going back probably 30 years now. He's been looking in. So for me, if you're only going to take one supplement, the most efficacious one that, isn't protein is definitely creatine. It's got the most studies. It's got the most usage data. It's got the most research behind it. And a lot of stuff that was hot and then not, is because the research just does not support it, and it's people just trying to hype stuff up to get people to buy the new thing, where sometimes you don't need to try the new thing. It's the old thing that still works and will always work. But again, understanding what your DNA is and what works for you genetically. So again, we've got some anecdotal evidence that people of a certain origin will better benefit from creatine use than others.
Fascinating. I would love for us to dive into the DNA, but my sense is that if there's one, it's creatine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Thank you again so much
Thank
for
you.
joining. Really, it has been a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great week. Hashtag make it
You
happen.
too. I saw that. I saw that in the back.